Parshas Bamidbar is already, we're holding Shavuos time, is getting us ready for Kabbalah HaTorah, and the Parsha itself gets us ready. I want to start with a kasha that we've discussed in the past, but with a new mahalach. If you learn Parshas Bamidbar, in the beginning of Parshas Bamidbar, there's a counting of Klal Yisrael, and it gives all the numbers of each shevet. And then, a short while later, in the next parak, after it introduces the concept of the degalim, the flags, and the arrangement of Klal Yisrael around the Mishkan, so when it's arranging each shevet where they belong, it mentions the count again. Now, it seems that it wasn't two counts, it was one count, but the numbers are mentioned twice. That's how the Ramban says it. In Beis Dalid, the Ramban says, Ki lo imon oyata pam acheres. It wasn't another counting, but it's mazkir again, the same numbers that I just mentioned a few psukim before. Ramban says a reason. Ramban says to tell us a miracle that from the time of the count until they traveled about 20 days later, not a single person in Klal Yisrael died. And it's to tell you that great nace.
No one was born either?
Now that what?
Oh, no one was born. It doesn't matter if they're born.
Yeah. And there's a lot to talk about the technicality of those numbers, and also, yeah, exactly, and either way, the Ramban needs a pshat, like why is that significant? What was the point of that nace? But I want to suggest today a possible reason why the count would be mentioned twice in Parshas Bamidbar. In one parsha, the numbers of Klal Yisrael mentioned twice. And I want to learn with the Olam a little bit with our own nusach, but I want to learn with the Olam the first mimer in the Pri Tzaddik in Parshas Bamidbar from Reb Tzaddik. So, Reb Tzaddik brings the Medrash. It's one of the first Midrashim in Parshas Bamidbar, because Parshas Bamidbar begins discussing the Midbar. Right? Parshas Bamidbar begins, Vayidaber Hashem al Moshe, with two statements, two locations. Bamidbar Sinai, Be'oihel Mayed. Very interesting. In the desert, in the Mishkan. Bamidbar Sinai, Be'oihel Mayed. And the Medrash, based on the fact that it mentions Bamidbar Sinai, the Medrash discusses that the Torah is compared to the desert, to Mayim, to water, to Eish, to fire. And the Tzaddik right away says the water and the fire, that's not relevant to our parsha. But the Midbar, that's mentioned here, that the Torah was dafka given in a Midbar, because if you want to acquire Torah, you have to be, Kelashon HaMedrash, you have to be Mesim Atzmai Kemidbar, to make yourself like a desert. So I want to discuss in the next few minutes what it means that we only acquire Torah when we make ourselves like a desert. What does it mean to make yourself like a desert? And Reb Tzaddik asked, I found this question fascinating. You have to be a Baki and Medrash to ask the question. Reb Tzaddik says, why is the Medrash finally picking up on the fact that the Torah is given in the Midbar, in Parshas Bamidbar? Why isn't this Medrash on the Pasuk in Parshas Yisro that says, Bayoyim Hazeh, Bo Midbar Sinai? We're going to have Rosh Chodesh Sivan coming up, the Karov, and we're going to be excited from Bayoyim Hazeh, Bo Midbar Sinai. That's what you should discuss. Mesim Atzmai Midbar. But the Medrash does not discuss it over there. The Medrash discusses it here. Why is it here? We live in a day and age that people feel very, very comfortable quoting Sfarim of Kabbalah as if we really understand these things. So I want to give a cautionary, just a hakadama, that Reb Tzaddik quotes a Zohar, and our zechus to learn the Zohar from Reb Tzaddik is because he's being our Rebbe and explaining the Zohar to us, not because we think that we're people that are roi to sit and learn Zohar. But Reb Tzaddik teaches us a Zohar, we could learn it from him. And Reb Tzaddik brings a Zohar in the beginning of this week's parsha that says, very, very interesting lashon, Kivan de oiraisa umashkena itukmu. Once the Torah and the Mishkan were established, Ba'a kutshabrichu lemifkad cheloi de oiraisa. HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted to count the soldiers of the Torah. Kama chayolin inon de oiraisa. How many soldiers are there for the Torah? The kama chayolin inon de mashkena. And how many soldiers are there for the Mishkan? And Reb Tzaddik is intrigued that it mentions in the counting that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants to know how many soldiers are there for the Torah and how many soldiers are there for the Mishkan. Like, what are those two things? So in order to understand that, we have to remind ourselves of what we were makabel, and we discussed here many times, about what it means that when they were makabel the Torah, they were makdim nasa to nishma. They said nasa before nishma. They said we will do before we will hear, which is not the logical way to respond. When someone is asked if they want the Torah, they should say, I will listen to it and I will do it. But instead, they said, we will do it and we will hear. What does that mean? And the Sfarim explain that there's a Mishnah in Avos and a Rabbeinu Yaina famously that talks about how is it possible to do before you hear. It's impossible. But this Pashut understanding of Nasa before Nishma is that it's a way of saying that Nasa and Nishma happen at the same time. Nasa v'Nishma. If you say Nishma v'Nasa, you might think Nishma and then Nasa. But Nasa v'Nishma, the point is that when you tell me to do something, let's look at nowadays, the way we are now. So if you ask me to do something, so I say, sure, I'll do it. Does that mean I'll do it? Maybe. Does that mean I'll do it now? Maybe. Does it mean I'll have the strength for it? Maybe. Does it mean I won't be lazy? Maybe. But there's no certainty that that hearing and doing are automatic. Because we have this thing called a body, and the body gets tired and lazy and distracted and full of other desires, and it sometimes finds itself drifting away from the inspiration and the knowledge of what it needs to do. So that the Shulchan Aruch could say, Yizgaber ka'ari, lakum la'avodas bayrei, and we could know that Chazal very, very well by heart, and still have a hard time being Yizgaber ka'ari when the morning comes. Because the Nasa is not necessarily fully attached and fully engaged and fully connected to the Nishma. When Klal Yisrael said Nasa v'Nishma, they were heading into a level in their existence that the guf, the body, was no longer chaytzitz b'fnei ha-neshama. As we've discussed several times, had the Klal Yisrael not done the chait of the Egel, they would have lived forever. They would have returned to the madrega of Adam Arisha in Kaidem HaChet. Paska zuamasa, the Gemara says in Shabbos Daf Peiches, that the zuama, the poison, the filth from the Chet of Adam Arisha went away. They reached a level, literally, of Nasa v'Nishma. There's no chatzitza. There's no block. The Yetzer Hara is not inside anymore. Just like before Adam Arishan's Chet, the Yetzer Hara was outside, right, in the form of the Nachash. The Yetzer Hara was outside of him, but inside of him was complete peace, both body and soul, wanting to serve Hashem, as the Ramban says in Parshas Bereishis. So too Klal Yisrael, when they stood by Har Sinai, Nasa v'Nishma was pshutay kemashmai. Nasa and Nishma come together. Nasa v'Nishma. And then they did the Egel. And they fell from that madrega of Nasa v'Nishma. And there's a lashon in Chazal that Chazal say that once Klal Yisrael did the Egel, It's a Medrash Rabbah in Parshas Yisroi that Hashem told Klal Yisrael, Shibartem naaseh, hizaharu b'nishma. Okay? You broke naaseh. You did the egel. At least be careful about nishma. Meaning, you didn't actualize. You didn't come through. You knew what to do, but then you didn't do it. Naaseh was broken. Be careful with nishma. Keep listening to the Torah. Keep learning Torah. That's your path back. Shibartem naaseh, hizaharu b'nishma. Reb Tzadok says, and I'm going to read you a Ramban, that's a beautiful zushtel to this Reb Tzadok, and Reb Tzadok says this many, many, many times in many places in Chumash, that the building of the Mishkan, and ultimately the building of the Beis HaMikdash, was rebuilding Naaseh. It was rebuilding the Naaseh part of Avodas Hashem. In what way? Because the whole point of the Binyan HaMishkan was to fuse together the Shechina with the world, was to create a connection point between the Ruchni and the Gashmi, between the Neshama and the Guf, so to speak. And because of that Binyan, which the Rishonim already say, that the Mishkan was built as a kapara to atone for the Chet HaEgel, so because of that, when the Hashras HaShechina exists in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, it creates a reality of a beautiful and complete fusion of the spiritual and physical world, where the Shechina is clear and present and active in this world. And that was Klal Yisrael's, that was a major step forward for Klal Yisrael in returning to a world where there's no separation between the Guf and the Neshama, where the Guf and the Neshama are fused together. We were not yet Zeicha, and we should be Zeicha, B'meir v'yomenu. We were not yet Zeicha that this became part of the experience of each individual Yid. We weren't Chayzer to that Madrega, but it was a significant step forward that at least all of us joined together in our donations to the Mishkan. We joined together to create a place where Nasa v'Nishma is alive, where there's a Ashras HaShechina attaching itself to a physical world. So, Maimed Har Sinai is our Nishma, and the Binyan HaMishkan is our Naaseh. Fascinating that the Ramban says in the Hakadama to Parshas Bamidbar, and there's remuzim of this Ramban in several places. The Ramban says, beginning of the Ramban, the beginning of the Ramban's introduction to this third sefer of Chamisha Chumshei Torah, the Ramban says, Achar shebi'er Torahs hakarbanos b'sefer hashlishi. This fourth sefer actually. Once the Torah explained the Seder of Karbanis in the third Sefer of the Chamisha Chumshei Torah, Hischil Ata L'Sader B'Sefer Hazeh, the Torah begins now to arrange in this Sefer HaMitzvahs Shenitztavu Be'inyan Oyel Moed. And then he says, Ukvar Hizi, and then he says like this, Ata Yagbil Es HaMishkan. Now the Torah will show the boundaries of the Mishkan, B'hiyoisei Bamidbar, Ka'asher Higbil Har Sinai, B'hiyoisei HaKavod Sham. Just like Har Sinai, when the Kavod Shemayim was on Har Sinai, there was a Hagbalah around Har Sinai. Now there's going to be a Hagbalah around the Mishkan. And he's really hinting to something that he says Mefurish in other places, that the fire, that the gold of the Kodesh HaKadosh, which represents Eish, represents the fire that burned on Har Sinai. Because that's this vart of Reb Tzadok, that the Hashras HaShechina that was lost when Klal Yisrael did the Egel was brought back. That's why it's called the Mishkan HaEdos, Eidos Li Yisrael, HaKadosh Baruch Hu was Meichel for the Chet HaEgel. That fire came back in the form of a Mishkan. And that's what Chazal say, that's what the Medrash, that's what the Mishnah says in Tainus, right? B'yoyim chasunasai u'b'yoyim simchas libay. So the Mishnah says, B'yoyim chasunasai, the day of his wedding, that's the day of the giving of the Torah. B'yoyim simchas libay, the day of his rejoicing, that's the day of the building of the Beis HaMikdash. Because those two things work together. Getting the Torah, that's our nishma, learning the Torah, but actually infusing the physical world with the spirituality, with the ruchnius of the Torah, that's Binyan Beis HaMikdash, that's the Naaseh. It says Reb Tzadok, now we understand what these two soldiers are. Hashem says, I want to look at the soldiers of the Torah and the soldiers of the Mishkan. What's the soldiers of the Torah and the soldiers of the Mishkan? So Reb Tzadok says, soldiers of the Torah, that's our nishma, our connection to the Divrei HaTorah. The fact that each one of us knows that there's a connection between there's the same chelkeinu b'sayrasecha, that every one of us has a chelik in Torah and a connection with Torah. And the soldiers of the Mishkan, that's in response to the Chet HaEgel. That's those Hashem wants to know his soldiers that recognize the need for an effort to bring that Torah into them, to fuse the Ruchnius with Gashmius, to make it a part of them. That's the two go together, obviously, but that's the soldiers of the Mishkan. Meisim atzmai kamidbar. Make yourself like a desert. It's interesting that the Gemara in Eruvin on Daf Nun Daled, in the pasuk of Bamidbar matana, Rashi I think brings it in Chumash. I think it's a Gemara. I think it's in Bava Basra also. But Bamidbar matana, I think it's in Bava Basra also. Bamidbar matana, the measure says the same thing, that a person is only zeicha b'Torah if he makes himself like a desert. But the Gemara adds a few words. The Gemara says a person is only zeicha b'Torah if he makes himself into a desert that everybody walks on it. Shehakol dashin ba. Interesting. What does that mean? So Rashi says shehakol dashin ba she'en le gasos, that he doesn't have gaiva. He's not full of himself. And I think what's going on here, this meisim atzmai kamidbar, is a little bit daima to what we talked about a few weeks ago, when we talked about the fact that the Torah calls an anav, the Chazal call an anav flesh. I don't know if we talked about it here or upstairs, but the Torah calls an anav flesh, basar. There's a word in the sugya of Gaiva and Daf Heyam and Aleph and Saita. It says someone who's meisim atzmai kebasar. He makes himself like flesh. Very strange term. The Gemara says that someone who's meisim atzmai kebasar, tfilasai nishmas. His tefillah is listened to. His tefillah is heard if he makes himself like basar. How do you know? Because it says yavai kol basar lehishtachavos. So you see that a person's meisim atzmai kamidbar, kebasar, his tefillah will be nishmas. What's the word of meisim atzmai kebasar? The word is, there's no me. I'm a piece of flesh. There's no me. All of me is what HaKadosh Baruch Hu has given me. All of me is what's been infused into me. Vayipach ba'apav nishmas chayim. Hashem blew life into this piece of meat. Now I'm a person. Now I have an opinion. Now I have talents. Now I have friends. Now I have possessions. Now I have mishpacha. All of those things I have because HaKadosh Baruch Hu gifted me with them. Without what HaKadosh Baruch Hu did, what am I? I'm a piece of flesh. I'm basar. Without the vayipach ba'apav nishmas chayim. A desert is completely empty. It's a desolate makom. Hakol dashaba, it's hefker. There's nothing there. The point is not that there's no guy that I think lowly of myself. We know, we don't have to speak that out. We know already that that's not what anava is. The point is that Torah completely defines me. There's nothing in my life that's not defined by Torah. Take Torah away, you're left with a midbar. There's no cities, there's no cars, there's no roads, there's no trees, there's no life, there's no water. There's just empty. Because Torah completely defines me. 613 mitzvahs, 248 mitzvahs, I say, 365 mitzvahs, I say, derabbanans, minhagim, new ideas, thoughts, perspectives, divrei musar, divrei halacha. My entire life, wherever you turn, is formed and shaped and molded by the words of the Torah. Everything that we do, that we think, that from the moment that we're born to the moment that we leave this world is completely shaped by the Torah. At least that's the way we're supposed to live. And if you pull that out, there's a midbar. So Mesim Atzmai Midbar is, there's nothing here. I'm taking on the Torah to create an identity and meaning and structure and purpose and inspiration and joy and all of the things that build the entire complexity of life comes from the Torah. And without that, it's a midbar. Sha'akol dashimba. There's nothing there. It's an empty midbar. And that's the lesson, Reb Tzaddik says, of why it says Bamidbar Sinai, why the Medrash talks about making yourself like a midbar here and not in Parshas Yisro. He says, because in Parshas Yisro they didn't do the Egel yet. So it wasn't necessary for Chazal to explain that in order to be Zeicha B'Torah, you have to go through this process, this tikkun, of working on yourself, applying yourself, to allow Torah to completely bring you to life. But once you did the Egel, and you separated Nishma from Naaseh, and now you could be learning Torah and doing something else. And the doing is not dafka connected to the hearing. The Nishma and the Naaseh are not dafka connected to each other. Oh, Parshas Bamidbar, which is already about the Mishkan, which is here to be Mesakein, the Chet Egel. Now we talk about Bamidbar Sinai, that a person needs to be Mesim Atzmai. A person needs to be Mesim Atzmai Kamidbar. And this takes effort. This takes amelos, it takes yagiyah, it takes effort for a person to apply himself, because it's not natural for us, like it may have been after we makabel the Torah. It's not a natural thing. Our bodies and everything that comes along with that have their own has its own ideas, and its own desires, and its own agendas, and its own needs, and its own hurt, and its own reactions, and to be able to take a guf and to apply it to being mekabel Torah, it's an effort to be mesim atzmai kamidbar. There's a lot of stuff that needs to be shoveled away to be left with a midbar. It's an effort. It's a yagiyah. It's an amelus. Shatiu amelim b'Torah. It takes work. We have to apply ourselves to prepare ourselves for that. And I think possibly that's why the minyan is repeated twice. Because Hashem says, I want to know my soldiers of the Torah and my soldiers of the Mishkan. So it says one minyan, and then when it's talking about the degolim surrounding the Mishkan, it says the soldiers again. And Reb Tzaddik says something phenomenal. There's a big discussion of what it means, Vayisyaldu al Mishpachaisam. Vayisyaldu, so Rashi says that they showed the book of their yichus, like, are you who you say you are? Like, prove it. They had a genealogy that they showed when they were counted. But the Reb Tzaddik says, there's a beautiful, beautiful Ramban that describes the moment of each Yid being counted. And the Ramban, it wasn't just like a census like today. It says that the Moshe and Aaron and the Zekanim would stand there and take the numbers from each Ohel and give a bracha to each one. And something in such a lashon in the Ramban that when Moshe and Aaron would be mesim einehem aleihem, they would put their eyes on them, it would bring tremendous bracha. It was a moment of growth, this moment of being counted. Because being counted as one of Hashem's soldiers, that's a moment. It's not just a census. This is Hashem is counting his soldiers. And I was just counted as one of Hashem's soldiers. I'm not just anybody. I am being counted as one of Hashem's soldiers. Says Reb Tzaddik, unbelievable. Says Reb Tzadok that Vayisyaldu al mishpachaisa means that they were reborn. They were born again. That they had a new life, a ruach chadasha, a new ruach. They were counted after the Chet HaEgel and everything. It was a lot of shvara zachet. A new life, a new lichtigkeit that came into them from being counted. So that's the two countings. They weren't counted twice, but that's the two dimensions of the counting. The two dimensions of the counting was my connection to Torah and my being prepared to do the work, to properly attach myself to the Torah. And that's something, last night was 40. We're heading quickly towards Matan Torah. And I feel an urgency that we shouldn't make the mistake of merely being Makabel Torah as part of a nation that's being Makabel Torah, which is wonderful enough. But that we as individuals should have a yanta for being Makabel the Torah. That we are accepting the Torah. And for each of us, everyone knows their own heart. Everyone knows their own life. Everyone knows where that shovel needs to go. To be Mesa Matzmai Kamidbar, to clear out what's there and to allow oneself to be just open and ready to just be makabel, the ruach of the Torah completely. So that's the message of the parsha that we lay right before Shavuos. So we have the two countings, the two mentions of the counting. We have the two elements of being a soldier of Hashem, that I'm connected to learning His Torah, but I'm transforming myself in that acceptance of His Torah. Naaseh v'nishma. We have the element, the fact that we know that when Klal Yisrael said Naaseh v'nishma, there was no two things, because it was all one. As soon as I heard it, I was it. But now we don't have that. Now we have to hear it, and we have to be meichen ourselves. There's two elements today, and we learned that that's the two parts of Yom Chasunasai and Yom Simchas Liboy, my acceptance of the Torah and my building the Beis HaMikdash, because the Beis HaMikdash was the fusion of the spiritual and the physical, the bringing the Shekhinah down into this world, and the schus, and maybe we could taste it a little bit, the schus, the unbelievable opportunity. Maybe this Shabbos we have that opportunity. When we read in the Torah that Moshe and Aaron counted every Yid, let's stand there and be counted. Let's stand there when we're listening to that Kriya, and let's say, I also want to be counted. I also want to be one of Hashem's soldiers. I also want the Ruach Hadasha. I want to be reborn. Like the whole past was just a prelude for today. My whole background was just a preparation for this moment of being reborn into Avodas Hashem. And that's a chus. We'll be able to face the days ahead of Kabbalah Satara, Shleishis Yimei Rosh Chodesh Sivan, Shleishis Yimei Hagbala, and the Torah being nitten b'Shabbos this year, right? Shavuos is Shabbos this year, and the Gemara says, Hakol Moedim b'Shabbos nitna Torah. Everyone agrees that the Torah was given on Shabbos. There's a lot of dispute about what day in Sivan it was, but nobody disagrees that it was Shabbos. And this year, we accept the Torah on Shabbos. At least we do. We have the schus, being a chutz la'aretz, to accept the Torah on Shabbos. The Bnei Eretz Yisrael will have to stand on our shoulders. For them it's going to be Isru Chag. For them it's going to be unusual to be celebrating 2 days in a row. But for us, the schus of B'Shabbos Nitna Torah, HaKadosh Baruch Hu should give us this kayach to be able to, each of us in our own way, to be Mesim Atzmai Bamidbar, and to clear ourselves out so we could be completely defined by our devotion to Hashem's Torah. Yashikayach.